One of the consequences of complex trauma is a compromised sense of self or self-concept, meaning that our view of ourselves can be distorted in certain interactions over time. These distortions, they often act as a lens in which we view our interactions, especially with our partner. Now, the goal is to be able to recognize and challenge these lenses when they appear in our relationship, because these lenses usually have a negative talk associated with them. Negative talk such as, I'm lazy, I'm stupid, I'm unlovable, I will never get the love I want, I don't deserve love, I will be abandoned or rejected or neglected in my relationships. In this episode, we're going to discuss the 7 most common cognitive distortions so that we can begin to recognize and challenge these faulty beliefs when they arise. Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship. I'm Tom Philp, your host, and as a therapist, I've spent over 10,000 hours helping couples work through their trauma so they can repair ruptures, heal their wounds, and communicate from a place of wholeness and connection. Let's get started. Okay, as I mentioned in the intro here, we're going to talk about the 7 most common misconceptions or cognitive distortions because of the nature of complex trauma that emerge in our relationship. So one of the things we know, besides disturbances in relationships, is a consequence of complex trauma, and emotion regulation is a consequence of it as well. And then the third is that we have these negative self-concepts. Oftentimes, we internalize these situations that were out of control, and they end up creating a negative, distorted voice deep inside of us. And these distortions sit down deep in our heart, and they're covered by layers of protection. So oftentimes we don't even recognize that these distortions that we have about ourselves end up guiding our interactions, end up being used as a lens and framing our view of ourselves and others because of the layers of protection that we build against them. They're also extremely sensitive. Anytime somebody comes near to these distortions, which also holds the pain and the shame of our past traumas, then we fight fiercely to protect them, which is obviously sort of like shooting ourselves in the foot, so to speak, because our whole goal should be to heal them. But instead, what we often do is protect them by having a self-fulfilling prophecy where we bring about the very thing that we do not want. Let me give you an example. Let's say you notice that your partner is very quiet that day. And so you go and approach them as they sit on the couch and you say, honey, is anything wrong? I've noticed you're very quiet today. And your partner says, no, nothing's wrong. I just feel kind of tired. And you say, well, are you sure nothing's wrong? Because if I've done something, I want to talk. No, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong, dear. I just am a little bit quiet. Well, you're usually not quiet unless something's wrong. And so the more you start probing, the more you poke, the more you pressure your partner to confide that there is something wrong because of the anxiety that you're feeling over his or her quietness, then eventually what begins to happen is your partner does get upset and say, you know what, now I'm mad because you won't leave me alone. And then internally you say, aha, I knew it. I knew there was something wrong. We're going to talk about those types of situations where what drives us cognitively and those distortions can end up bringing about the very things we're trying to avoid the most. So let's dive in. We've got 7 cognitive distortions we're going to talk about that can come out of complex trauma. The first one is called confirmation bias. Now, this is the tendency to listen more often to information that confirms our existing belief. Now, to be fair, this is something that everybody can engage in. This is one of these things that everybody can be faulty to. However, we see this more frequently with those who have suffered some kind of trauma in the past. So the tendency to listen more often to information that conforms to our existing beliefs. So if our partner at one time says, that's not the most flattering outfit you have on, let's look for something a little bit different that might be more appropriate to this occasion. What you might hear that is, I knew it, my partner thinks I'm unattractive. Or I knew it because they've given me hints in the past that they thought I was overweight, and so they're saying I look fat in this. And so it actually confirms what we already believe. Now, that may not be what our partner is intending at all. It may have absolutely zero to do with the way they think about us, but all of a sudden, because of what we believe about ourselves, now somehow this comment confirms that belief. So closely related to that is what we call the desirability distortion or bias. And this is when we see what we want to see. So oftentimes we will look and see things that are existing with our partner and ignore any kind of facts to the contrary. So, for example, our partner might be emotionally abusive to us. Maybe in the heat of the moment, they call us very bad names, or they really attack our character. But at other times, they can be very kind and sweet when the relationship is in a good place. So what do? You think to yourself, well, that's not really them. They're not like that when they're mean. They just do that out of anger. But really, they're very sweet. And so I want to see them as the sweet, kind person they are. And I downplay or ignore this other side of them that can come out with fangs and teeth and claws when they're upset with me, even though I can get very badly hurt. And so desirability bias is our ability to want to see what we see while downplaying or ignoring facts to the contrary. Because the contrary to that is your partner is both. They're not either or. And they've got some behaviors that they need to correct, and you need to bring it to their attention in a safe way. But just downplaying that aspect of who they are, that part of them that can be really mean and really aggressive and go for the jugular, so to speak, but then, they're nice and sweet and kind when we're in a good place. So what I do is I spend all my time and energy making sure we just stay in a good place instead of being able to show up authentically and be myself in this relationship. So all these distortions can have consequences in the way we interact and behave with others. The third one is projection, the tendency to attribute negative attributes to others, which we actually have ourselves. This is one I see all the time. So anytime couples get caught in negative cycles in their relationship, you can be sure that there is a healthy dose of projection going along with it, where they begin to project aspects of their own personalities that they don't like onto their partner. And the problem with that then is if they begin to believe that their partner actually holds these projections, then they begin to treat their partner in a way that confirms what they already believe. Again, this can be very closely to confirmation bias, but instead of looking outside ourselves, we're actually projecting an aspect onto our partner. And so projection is something that happens frequently. It happens in all relationships, and it doesn't just have to happen when couples are caught in negative cycles. But we probably don't interact to some degree without some sort of projection. And projection can also be positive too. We can project positive qualities onto somebody and see them as being more positive than they truly are, which is called the halo effect. And then, of course, we can also project negative aspects onto our partner as well. So projection is the third cognitive bias we're talking about. The fourth one I see a lot in relationships is overgeneralization, where we draw sweeping conclusions based on limited evidence. And this one I see a lot as well. So I call my partner and I say, hey, would you like to go out and have a really nice dinner tonight? It's my treat. I'm just feeling so good. I've had a great day. And your partner says, oh, I just don't want to do that tonight. I am just exhausted and I've had a long day. I'd love just to be able to stay home and have a quiet dinner. And you say, oh, okay, no problem. And you feel a little bit down and it's kind of been a buzzkill. And all of a sudden through the rest of the day, you start overgeneralizing that. Well, I wonder if something's wrong. I wonder if they're thinking about leaving me. I wonder what will happen when I go home tonight. Are they going to feel withdrawn? Is this relationship not working for them anymore? I bet they're falling out of love with me. And so you can see where we begin to overgeneralize on a limited amount of evidence what was happening in the relationship. And I can see this a lot as well in our couples. When something happens and they draw these big conclusions about what their partner might think or feel based on just a little bitty bit of evidence. I also see it in its opposite form when one partner has a hard time with trust and doesn't believe when their partner says something complimentary to them or says, I love you with all my heart. There's a little piece of them that says, yeah, but I can point to these 5 things you've done that tell me you don't love me. And they might be something as little as, well, I asked you to fill up gas in the gas tank and you didn't get gas for me, so that proves you don't love me. Right? Because if you loved your partner, wouldn't you want to do that for me? Wouldn't you want to fill up my gas tank when I asked? So we can overgeneralize from small, limited pieces of evidence something that we think is happening in our relationship. Okay, the fifth one is personalization, taking responsibility for events that were beyond our control. This also includes our partner's comments. I can see where couples, especially when they get caught in these negative patterns of protection more often than not, when they both move into their defenses, that they can personalize each other's comments. And this is a really quick way that they end up continuing to spiral down into their negative cycles. So taking responsibility for events that were beyond your control. This definitely happens with complex trauma, no question about it, where you might assume responsibility for something that happened to you as a child that absolutely you had no control over, and that was absolutely not your responsibility. It is not your responsibility to be a parent to your parent when you're a child. It is not your responsibility to create a safe environment in which you can get your needs met when you're a child. That is your parents' or caretakers' responsibilities. It is not your responsibility to be able to meet your parents' needs, to make sure that they're fulfilled, they're loved, and they're happy. That is not your responsibility as a child. That is their responsibility as the adult. So oftentimes, coming out of complex trauma, we can have these beliefs about ourselves that we use as a lens where we assume responsibility for things that are beyond our control. Number 6, should statements and masturbation. Now, let me explain what this means. We can create unrealistic expectations for ourselves and others that are self-imposed. So we might say to ourselves deep down, my relationship should look like this. My partner should treat me this way. I must act this way at all times in my relationship. I must always be happy and glad to see my partner. I must never show my sadness or frustration. Coming out of our environment that created complex trauma for us, oftentimes we can have these rules that we think we have to apply that are rigid and are inflexible. And what we do is we then treat ourselves and act as if we have to follow these rules. And these rules are totally self-imposed. We created these rules out of our complex trauma, out of our relationship trauma, and then act as if they must be followed. So we have these statements, these should statements, or these masturbation statements. I should do this. I must do this, that can lock us into rigid beliefs and behaviors that then play out with our loved ones. And finally, the last one is negativity bias, the tendency to focus more on negative experiences rather than positive experiences. And this is really easy to do when we get caught in those negative patterns, those patterns of protection with our partners. Because the truth is, we have more negative emotions than positive emotions. Our mind tends to slant towards the negativity of events than the more positive of events. And what we know is that we often have to overwhelm ourselves with more positive feedback, more positive things. We have to work harder to see the more positive in other people and in ourselves, or we can automatically slant towards the negative. And this is especially true in our relationships if we've come out of a place of complex trauma. We tend to view things in a more negative light. And so we've gone through 7 different of what I would consider the most common cognitive distortions based on complex trauma in our relationship. And so the question becomes now, what do we do? Well, as I mentioned at the outset, our goal here is 1, to be able to recognize, and 2, to be able to combat some of these distortions when they do arise in our relationship. We need to be able to think about how we think. We have to create enough space that we can step back and observe and look at the way we're thinking in order to be able to challenge our thoughts. So here's my challenge for you. First of all, write down your thoughts about your partner. Write down your thoughts about your partner when you guys are connected, and write down your thoughts about your partner when you guys are disconnecting, when you might be caught in more of a negative cycle. And then take a slow, easy breath in and out. And I want you to examine the evidence for and against each one of those thoughts. Is the positive thoughts true when you guys are connecting? Or can you also see an element of the negativity in those positive thoughts? Do you feel loved and cared for, but also deep down begin to question whether your partner really loves you? Or on the opposite side, do you feel like you just feel unloved a vast majority of the time, regardless of how much your partner tells you or demonstrates to you that they love you? So does one or the other tell a true, full story of what's happening? Now, I want you to notice how these thoughts affect your feelings towards your partner. Because of the truth of the matter is, we're not any one thing. Ourselves in relationships and our partners in relationships are a mixture of good things that they bring to the relationship and sometimes some bad, negative things they might bring to the relationship. And our goal is to be able to challenge the way we think and feel at those times so we can balance them out and hold them in tandem. I don't want you to be in a relationship where all you do is idolize your partner, because that puts you in a one-down situation and you begin to feel like you are not worthy and you put your partner on a pedestal. I also don't want you to feel like you're better than your partner, because that can lead to control and potentially abuse issues, not necessarily always physical, but it can lead to issues where you feel like you're just a little bit better and you might talk down to your partner at times. So there needs to be the ability to hold the positive and negative simultaneously without resorting to one or the other. And then finally, I want you to think of at least one alternative way of thinking about the situation that might be more accurate. So if you're in a really healthy, positive place, can you take in the positive feelings from your partner? to help you heal? If you're in a negative place, can you find one alternative way to look at that situation that might be a little more positive? So I hope this was educational for you today. I hope that you found a little bit challenged as we walk through these different cognitive distortions that we can have that come out of our complex trauma. As always, I really appreciate you listening, and we're going to continue to bring new episodes to you every week, every Thursday, as we help you grow and learn and heal in your relationships. Until next time, we'll talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.